We gotta stop meeting like this, Miss Ross.
Yeah, I was going to say that's Jean Ross.
I said, we gotta stop meeting like this. Jean.
Hello, Jean. Hi, Kim. How are you?
For chair.
Okay, so we're going to get started. So, 5?
I came in late.
We're going to get started. Sorry. If people can find their seats, we're 10 minutes late starting, which I kind of planned into it, so we're all right. So we have some people joining us by video call, and we have a bunch of invited participants that I've worked with that are in the audience, and then we have people that we don't know in the audience that are left forum attendees, and I'm sure you all have a lot of expertise or interest or background in these issues as well. So let me just get started, and I'm going to talk about sort of how this is going to go for our session. This is coordinating regional strategies in the movement against mass incarceration. And I want to give a 10-minute or so introduction about who I am, how was this event organized, why we're here, who's in the room, what the point of today's session is, and what do we want to come out of here with. And then we'll jump into some discussion questions. I'm holding this mic because that allows them on video to hear us, and we're also filming this. This is hopefully the first in a series of several sessions. The next one will be in Philadelphia on June 10th, a big prison summit they have every year, and I know some of you are going to be coming to that, and I invite you all to come. It's free. So we don't have to get everything done here at this session. But this is the first in a series. If you don't want to be on the video, please let me or Linda sitting back there know afterwards, and we will not include you. But the point is that some of the people that didn't get to come here will be able to watch it and participate in the following sessions. So I think I'll explain sort of how I came to organize this and use that as a way to introduce some of the people that are here. My name is Matt Pillischer, and I am an activist, an artist. I have a filmmaking background, and activism led me to law school, so I'm a lawyer as well. I really got involved with criminal justice work first in Cincinnati when I first became an activist and was witnessing a lot of the racism and police brutality in that town, and I did a lot of anti-racist organizing there about 10 years ago. And then when I came back to the Philadelphia area, of course, we have our own deep-seated, long, probably the longest in the country, histories of racial problems in Philadelphia, did organizing there. And then when I was in law school, I interned for a civil rights law firm that has been suing this Philadelphia and the jail system for decades because of horrible conditions inside the city jails. So I was able to work on lawsuits there. I also interned for other organizations that either did criminal defense or work inside the prisons or detainee centers in Pennsylvania. So that's some of my background. In my third year of law school, I was able to start a video class that allowed me to eventually make this movie that I know most of you through, Broken on All Sides, which is about sort of the history and causes of mass incarceration. So let me talk about some of the people. I'm also a member of the National Lawyers Guild, and that is a radical lawyers organization. And Azadeh, who you see on the screen right now, is our president. She is a lawyer, and she is joining us from Georgia. So that's how I know Azadeh. And she heads the Immigrant Rights Project with the ACLU of Georgia. So she can speak to a lot of sort of the immigration, detention issues of deportation, and how those relate to mass incarceration. When I first premiered the film in New York, that's when I met Mualimm-ak, who is sitting right here. Five is a really amazing organizer who was formerly incarcerated, who is doing tons of great work in New York City and New York State, and can speak to experiences personally. I want to recognize Bonnie Kerness, who is with the AFSC Newark Prison Watch Project and has been doing work on this issue probably longer than any of us, and has really brought a lot of amazing work to the table. And, you know, I'm especially honored that you were able to make it, because I know it's a bit of a trek for you, so thank you. Gail Mohammed is also in New Jersey, and she is the head of Women Who Never Give Up. And she basically works with family members that have loved ones in prison. And so she has also decades of experience working on this issue. Glen Martin is joining us. He is founding a new organization called JustLeadershipUSA. And thank you, Glen, for being here. Its main goal is to reduce the prison population in half by 2030. And it's a lot of great ideas about, having the voices of people who are formerly incarcerated and most impact at the forefront of that. Arriving fashionably late is Jaz. Joseph Jaz Hayden, that many of you know, and he is a veteran in this movement, and he founded the Campaign to End the New Jim Crow and is doing great work in New York City. Azadeh Zohrabi is here from California. She's with the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, and they have sort of pivoted somewhat under Michelle Alexander's leadership, who was on the board, to really focusing on issues of mass incarceration. So I've been in conversations, and I'm sorry, we also have Marlene Martin, who is on the phone with us. Marlene, can you say hi?
Hi, everybody.
There she is.
Hi.
So, Marlene was the national director of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty for several years. She still works a lot with them, and she's in my movie Broken on All Sides, and she's an amazing organizer. She's joining us from Chicago, and we hopefully will have one other person, or at least one other person joining us, Theresa Shoatz, who is also in the movie, with her father is Russell Maroon Shoatz, who's been in Pennsylvania prisons for decades, a former Black Panther, and was in solitary for, I think, 2 decades. And we finally won his release to the general public, to the public inside the prison, not in solitary anymore. So that's some of our background. I wanted to, before we get started with the discussion questions, keep in mind 3 things as we go through this next hour and a half. I want to be thinking about the top issues that people are organizing around mass incarceration across the country, and some of those I think are collateral consequences. Ban the box, having also decent jobs when people come out and people to support them when they come out. Solitary confinement has big issue that people have been organizing around against, especially here in New York. Ending mandatory minimums. So I think these are some of the key places in my experience that people are sort of organizing around right now. And we want to think about how we could better work together across regions with these issues. I also want to think about maybe coming out of this session, is there at least one thing that we could plan to do together, some kind of larger action that we could all do or think about doing across regions? And again, maybe it's not figuring it out at this session, but if it's something you're interested in, deciding that we will work together in some way to do that. And then I also want to think about communications. So there are some people that are doing organizations that are focused on communications and messaging and how to keep people in touch across regions. And we may also have someone from Nation Inside was supposed to join us, Nick Superla, who some of you know. So those are some of the things I want to be thinking about as we're talking about this. So bear with me, this is a big task to facilitate this, and all of you giants in the room that are doing amazing work. I have been touring this movie, Broken on All Sides, across the country for the last 2 years to 15 plus states, and somebody's whistling. Oh, it's a siren. And wherever I've gone, people are saying, well, what's going on in Philly? What's going on in Trenton? What's going on in New York City? What's going on in Georgia? And we really, I think, haven't developed a way to sort of share what each of us is doing and keep in touch and begin organizing together. So that's part of what sort of initiated this session and also the one that I'm hoping to organize, that I'm organizing for Philly, and hopefully beyond that. So the invited participants, some of the people that I've recognized, I asked you all to fill out some of these questionnaires thinking about these ideas, and we've also been in discussion with them. So I tried to boil some of the main ideas down that I got back from you all to develop some questions that will allow us to start the conversation. So the first question, and let me ask the invited participants to be the first to respond. I'll let them respond for a while, and then I'll open it up to everyone else here. This is sort of the question about how big of a tent do we need in this movement? We're all in this room because we agree we need to end mass incarceration. We probably share a lot of the same analysis and how it came about, relation to past systems of racial and social control, and how to build resistance to it. So the first question is, how big of a tent do we need? Do we need a broad coalition? Do we just some general agreements on the theory and history? How much do disagreements about reform versus total system change and abolition is important? Or focusing on less harsh punishment versus prison abolition, things like that? Or, for example, there's a big divide right now about people focusing only on nonviolent offenders and sort of forgetting about people who have convictions for violent crimes. And so how do we figure out what goals we have in common and what are important and what we can let go? Marlene, one of the participants, eloquently said, you can't just pick up a big boulder and throw it. You need to chip away at it, and it gets smaller and smaller until you can pick it up and throw it. So I see that as sort of the way some of reforms are, but it doesn't mean you still don't need to get rid of the whole stone. How do we organize for much needed reform here and now, but not lose sight of the bigger picture of system change? And how can we use reforms to push ahead, train ourselves as organizers, and get more people involved, but not stop until we have, real justice? So let me first, if I can hear from any of the invited participants to speak to this. I'm going to try and keep people to 2 minutes or so we can hear from as many people as possible. Just raise your hand and I'll keep a list. Just keep it sort of like a foot away from you.
Yeah. First of all, the 2-minute comment was for me. I tend to go way over. Everybody knows that. I think that... farther away? Okay. I think that one of the challenges that I face in coalition building is getting past this some sense of funding in nonprofit industrial complex where people need to work individually to attain that low-hanging fruit. But I think that as we have more people in the leadership roles that are directly affected in these campaigns and in what we're doing, that doesn't matter. Because like me personally, I don't care about funding. I care about achieving the goal. And I think that if we find these intersections where our work can connect, we should be looking for reasons for it to connect rather than reasons for it to disconnect, and share our resources to achieve those goals. That's what legislation. Try to sign more people on. Don't think about getting the credit for it. Think about getting the credit for coalition building. And create statewide campaigns, which is something that we should do more often to include the entire state. And I was totally under two.
That was
yes, I was very proud of myself.
And Azadeh or Marlene, if you want to chip in, just say, I'd like to talk.
Okay.
Sure, I'll say something about can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, I think in the immigration detention context, we've had this question come up. Actually, we recently had our nationwide conference, the Detention Watch Network, where we discussed this because a lot of our work, and other organizations is focused on conditions, people contacting us with really urgent situations, medical situations that need to be taken care of immediately. And so that's, where the focus seems to be or needs to be for a lot of us on a daily basis. But then, at the end of the day, we talked about we're not interested in building more perfect jails. We're interested in shutting these places down. And so, I think the challenge is coming together with a strategy where we can, in the short term, ensure that immigrants are, receiving humane treatment, but in the long term, building a campaign where we can, we have a campaign actually Expose and Close focused on shutting down the worst immigration detention centers to begin with, but in the long term, really, the goal should be abolition.
So I think the only way this conversation will be fun is if it's a bit controversial. I would argue that I'm not at the point where I'm comfortable suggesting that we're in the middle of a social justice movement. I think there's huge opportunity to perhaps be at the beginning of a social justice movement, but if you look backwards, social justice movements are led by people most impacted by the issue, and I think we're very far away from that point in this movement, unfortunately, and I appreciate that you can do the work without the resources, but why should you have to?
And that's where,
so I'll just open that up. Hopefully people will take that wedge and kick that door open a bit.
Hi, just to piggyback on what Glenn was saying and the brother here, I started off doing this work 10 years ago. Women Who Never Give Up will be 10 years in July. And at first, I'm going to stand up and say this because I mean it from my spirit. At first, I didn't think that it mattered about funding because my husband died. I am a part of this system because as an extended family member. But 10 years down, we can't do the work without the money. So funding is very, very important. Resources for organizations such as mine. I have, what is unique about Women Who Never Give Up is that we are the families of the incarcerated. We are the formerly incarcerated people. But at the end of the day, if I don't have funding to pay people to do work, then those people that we need most engaged cannot do it because they're working 2 and 3 jobs if they're recently released from an institution, if they can find a job. And if they can't find a job, then their loved one is working 2 and 3 jobs. So somehow we've got to figure out nationally how to support these boots on the ground campaigns from the little guys such as myself. So and funding is really important.
And it's more than just funding for activists. When people come home, and I don't think this is working.
It's not.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's just
when people come home, there is no entrepreneurship. There's nothing. I mean, I've had 1,000 ex-prisoners tell me, or people inside tell me, when I come home, I'm going to stand with you. And I've got Ojiri, who spent 22 years in isolation, and a couple of other people. But most people get lost because there's nothing built for them. There's no one for them to come home to. And I think those of us who are in organizations, whether or not we have money, need to provide a home.
Thank you. I agree with what's being said, and I think the funding issue is especially important, and I also think that the funding issue is an opportunity for additional collaboration between a lot of groups, because some organizations are more experienced in doing that and have better relationships with funders, and those organizations should have the responsibility of connecting with organizations that are probably younger or maybe don't have that expertise, and go to the foundations and apply for funding together and take a shared agenda to them. And we need to push the line on that in many ways, and also be finding ways to support ourselves in ways that don't depend on foundation funding, and being creative about the way that we fundraise. We did that prior to working at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. I was heavily involved in the hunger strikes in California and supporting the people that were in Pelican Bay on hunger strike. And they fundraised a lot for that movement. They would send us their art and we would sell it, and they would connect with their families and find other ways to do fundraising, and we need to be engaging in these creative strategies to make it happen.
So I'm going to open it up to everyone now, and you had your hand up. So
I did.
Some of you know me, I'm Judy Green, and I've done a lot of work at the state level and with state level groups. And also we do a lot of immigration work in Azadeh because we were on the panel together at DWN. But what I want to talk about briefly is a project that we started 2 years ago that is slowly growing, which is a national network of state-based advocates for decarceration. And the state-based groups that we began with are all mass-based groups in Connecticut, Michigan, Colorado, Arizona, and Oregon. Those 5 people who run state-based advocacy groups trying to control and bring the prison population down met together 2 years ago in Tucson. And then last November we met again and we had 32 people, 15 states. Next November, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we will be meeting again. We're trying to raise some travel scholarship money. And if you are interested, what we're trying to do is build a mass base of groups that are effective in their states or can be. The other states we invited last year were mostly states that weren't, organizations that weren't funded at all. And the agenda basically is to raise the profile of organizations in the flyover states that the foundations never talk to, and to give the foundations the idea that if they want to have a national movement, they've got to put some resources in the states where people are in prison.
What's the name of the group?
It's called the National Network for Justice. We will be launching a website probably in concert with our meeting in November. And if people are interested in contacting us, the person to contact is Nestor Rios, who works in my organization. His address is NESTORMRIOS, Nestor M. Rio, @gmail.com. Let him know you're interested. We'll send you a packet of information.
Why don't people can see you afterwards? People can see you afterwards. Oh, gee.
2 quick things. One is that the way that you posed the question sounded a little bit like the question that was discussed at the lunchtime meeting. Do we do electoral politics or something else? And does working with electoral politics take away from more revolutionary activity? And one of the things that the lady whose name I can't pronounce said from Seattle was that we do electoral work with an eye to not just winning elections, but organizing large groups. And in that sense, I think that there's an argument for our trying to have a bigger tent that includes human service agencies, particularly people from the advocates from, people from the mental health system, who's, because of what's happened, the transinstitutionalization of people for mental health, people who identify as children's advocates, political left organizations. We're going to try to make those connections in New Jersey, and also education people. Mostly, I'm really interested, me myself, in mental health advocates, because their folks are in the jails and prisons, and they're having such a hard time, at least in our state, dealing with the mental health system. It's hard to take on another system, but we have common cause and great need. So I'm in favor of cautiously expanding to a larger tent.
Marlene, did you want to speak? Marlene? Oh, she's there. I can see her. Okay, well, let me move on to another question. It's something that Glen brought up, and some other people have also spoken to. And I appreciate that comment. I mean, are we actually in a movement now? Is it the beginning? I sort of look at it as the beginning of a movement. So, as many of us have both perspective of grassroots outside the system organizing, but also, wanting funding, how do we balance that? We started to talk about this, and make sure that we're staying true to our message. And how do we make sure we're partnering with the right groups and people who won't sell us out down the line when they get an ear of someone in power or like a seat at the power table? We were talking about this. And also considering many of us are fighting with and for a population that is either behind bars or coming in and out of prison and targeted by police and other law enforcement agencies. A group of people that have their own ideas about struggles for liberation. How do we make sure those of us who are not in that group, that we stay in communication with them and we're not speaking for them without working with them? Which goes to, a movement has to be led by the people most impacted and have ideas for their own liberation. In some of your questionnaires, people said that there was concerns about who controls the message. That message be controlled by people most impacted or most willing for full system change, which may require a reframing of who are the experts and who are to be led. And at the same time, how do people less directly impacted, like myself, nonetheless move forward with ferocity and confidence in the fight against mass incarceration? So again, I'm going to start with people that were invited participants. So,
the Service Committee for, I think, since the 70s has received direction for whether it was reentry or youth or Prison Watch. The development of Prison Watch itself was directed from the inside out. The publications, Inalienable Rights, which backdrops prisoner complaints against UN treaties that the U.S. has signed, or torture in the United States. The Survivor's Manual, written by people living in isolation. It was started by OBrien for people living in isolation. I think everything has to be inside, outside led, which means that we have to have hard copies of stuff that will get inside, that there has to be an exchange. When the U.S. first began using isolation in a big way in the 80s, that was a very much inside, outside movement, and the regular meetings were conducted with prisoners calling. And I don't think we would have had a direction or a program or any kind of effectiveness without it.
I think we can go down the line. Jaz, behind you, can you pass the mic? And then Glen. And Marlene doesn't seem to be on the line. Maybe you would say something about the campaign and how we work with prisoners, but we'll come back. Go ahead, Jaz.
Yeah, I think about this 24 hours a day, so it's going to be kind of hard for me to stick to 2 minutes. The thought that came to my mind yesterday when I was visiting the panel with what's his name, the rapper? Immortal Technique. And I was listening to that panel, and they talked about everything but about building a movement. It was good conversation, and it was cogent remarks were made. And it just reminded me of a friend of mine named Jamal Joseph, who I was locked up with in 1971. And we became friends ever since then. And I remember coming out and asking him about, where's the movement? And he said the only movement out here is a bowel movement. And I tend to agree with him. For 40 years, we've been working with this boutique activism, where everybody staked out a piece of the problem and are invested in that. So every time we come together in a room and try to build or create a large umbrella, all the people in the room came in with their vested interests, and their loyalty belongs to the group that they came in with. And they can't, whether it's their funders or because of their funders or because of, their egos. And so this got me to reflecting on human beings. Human beings are genetically designed to be selfish. That's necessary for our survival.
I'll ask you to wrap up soon, and we can certainly come back.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna wrap up now.
Okay. Thank you, Jaz.
So what I have to say, I think is going to echo a bit of what I've already said, but I think it's worth saying repeatedly in this space and in many other spaces. I would tweak the way you framed some of this stuff around leadership, because I think often people who are in leadership in criminal justice reform hear the building of the capacity of for leadership by people most impacted as at the exclusion of their leadership. And that's not what we're saying, right? Any real social justice movement takes many different leaders in many different spaces at many different times saying many different things. So when people like me and like Devon and like Jaz and other folks say we want to not just be in leadership but have the capacity and the resources to be in leadership, that's not at the exclusion of other folks. So I wanted to say that. And number two, we talked about service providers, I believe, and their role. And I think if we're being honest with ourselves and honest with each other, reentry has the huge potential of being the next industrial complex that we have worries about, right? Because throughout American history and throughout history in general, when you are able to abolish a system like the one that we're looking at now, if you don't keep an eye on what's next, then other folks are way ahead of you. And I would argue that there's lots of signs that people are willing to move people out of prison and onto probation and onto parole and onto GPS and onto other forms of surveillance that runs the risk of us winning a battle and, again, losing the war. Who should I give this to?
Azadeh, do you have any comments? Or I wanted to hand it to Lee if you wanted to say about the campaign.
I was going to echo that I think building the capacity of directly impacted people is very important, and even getting us to recognize ourselves as experts is a huge process. I came into this work as a child of 2 political prisoners in Iran, escaped as refugees, and went through that whole process here, watched my loved ones in and out of prison in this country, and I didn't consider myself an expert until I was in law school and I was correcting my professors because they didn't know what they were talking about. So that was a process to me to even recognize myself as that, and I think another part of building the capacity is we have to build the professional capacity, but we also have to build the personal capacity, because a lot of us, as we're doing this work, we're also dealing with the issues. I've had the professional capacity to do this for a long time, but there's been times where I've struggled to even get out of bed because I'm dealing with the trauma and the weight of being in this and being directly impacted as a family member. So I think as we're thinking about capacity building, thinking about taking care of each other and taking care of each other's ability to do this work is also very important.
Yeah, sure.
So, hi everybody. I'm Hwon Graf from the Campaign to End the New Jim Crow, and also former board member of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty, the same organization. And the names are actually, one was inspired from the other. But I work with Jaz and Five and so on. And one of the, just I guess 2 quick things. I was relating a story recently about at one of our founding meetings, and Jaz will remember this, that there was about the question of leadership, and someone was kind of putting forward that we actually don't need any leadership, and being true to grassroots. You remember this conversation, Jaz? True to grassroots form means, everything is sort of opening, and of course we want free-flowing grassroots democracy and so on. And Jaz made the really good point, which is that why is it that when there's a movement of formerly incarcerated and others that are rising up, that all of a sudden the question of leadership then is abdicated or put aside? And I think what Glen is saying is really important, because there has to be an explicit recognition that we do need political leadership in our movements, and that, whether that's in people who are most committed to the struggle in a social justice way. And so and that's going to be mostly, starting with people who are most impacted. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then the other thing I want to say is that in the Campaign to End the Death Penalty has been around since the mid-90s, and one of the things that and it's always been very small, but one of the things that we did that I think is still a useful kind of strategy today is doing more of, I think it was Bonnie or someone over there talked about that inside outside process, because at that point 20 years ago, particularly, like, people on death row were sort of the worst of the worst, and trying to really bring their struggles and also just their experiences into the light of day. And I think the whole narrative around the death penalty has changed a lot in the past couple of decades, and I don't need to go into a lot of that, but now, like, struggles like the Death Row 10 who were tortured in Chicago, and so on, and how they began to organize behind bars has now helped pave the way for things like Pelican Bay, I think, and more of an awareness of that new tradition of struggle behind bars. So I guess I just feel like that is a really important piece of that. That's just kind of, if there's a movement that's rebuilding, I feel like that's where some of that's at, like Pelican Bay, Georgia, Chicago, et cetera. So. Thanks.
5, and then I'll go to some of you all.
So I just wanted to comment on the question that you stated about the importance of communication. So when I recently started and founded the Incarcerated Nation campaign, which has different components of it. And one of the 3 things that we do is education and outreach, of course, because we feel that education is important, doing events and outreach. But we also do communication through transparency. And I tried to network with a lot of other bigger organizations who might have wanted to reach everyone incarcerated. So I'm very grassroots. I know a lot of people who are just radicals in some sense, is what they call, right? And I actually ripped all the information from the Department of Corrections and the Bureau of Prisons. So I have like over 2 million names, locations, DIN numbers of everybody incarcerated in the United States of America. So when I made this proposal to outreach to everybody incarcerated, I said I'm sending a newsletter to everybody in New York State. I'm sending it with catalogs, I'm sending it with newsletters, information. Whoever wants to be a part of that can be a part of that. Nobody wanted to be a part of that. Everybody was like, oh, we're not ready for the big pushback. So I think that communication builds transparency, but if we're not, like Jaz says, shooting for the stars, instead of just aiming on the moon or aiming for the moon and then landing on the satellite or something, I think that we need to go overall. When we need to outreach, we need to outreach everybody. And one of the reasons why I wanted to create these umbrellas, which I think is the right thing to do, coalition building, is to erase those fine lines. People are protesting MCC for presumptive guilt. People are there for the amount of Hispanics that are locked up or the amount of Native Americans that are locked up. But regardless of what, you're still facing the same facility. So let's start erasing those lines and working together. And I think that without the bureaucracy of names and taking credit for things, we can actually just get down to doing the work, because this is the choir right here. And we need to just get down to doing the work. And I just also does reentry services and services for those coming out, because I feel that the direct service is what is going to make the change. Sorry.
You guys had your hands up. Do you want to move on? Okay. So you don't spoke hands. Okay. Jaz, come back.
Hi everyone. My name's Brendon Beck. I organize with Milk Not Jails. Also, Gail's here from Milk Not Jails. We work in New York State, trying to get dairy farmers and criminal justice advocates, anti-prison folks to talk to one another, build a statewide coalition. I think everything people have said is super important, and so I'm going to add a new question on the table, and if it's not one people want to talk about, just ignore it. But we're talking about coalition. How big should our tent be? Reformers versus abolitionists and some other divides. But I also want to ask, do we want to ally with small government conservatives? As prisons are getting shut down right now, it's often happening on fiscal grounds, right? We need to shrink government. We need to get government spending under control. So are those allies we want to join with, or will we then have ended mass incarceration and dismantled the welfare state and hurt folks in innumerable other ways? So and I know in the Tompkins County Jail expansion, people are aligning with small government folks up there. And then when we go to Albany, it's really tempting to sort of jump on this bandwagon of anti-government rhetoric and say, government can never do anything right, so let's close the prisons and close public housing and close the welfare office. So just, is that an alliance we want to create? And I'm thinking through it myself right now.
Yeah, I know this is going to sound offensive, but I want to assure you that I'm not defensive at all. As she said, you have to maybe find something out about who's directly affected. My father was in prison when I was born. My mother dumped him. I never had a father. I didn't go to college because I never support for that. And I've been working on this stuff for quite a while, as folks know. The other thing I'd like to say is that some of the folks in our core organization for the National Network for Justice are directly affected. Some of them aren't. But we have a keen sense that folks who are directly affected need to be helped up, and our method for that is peer-to-peer, which I think is really important for everybody. So we're trying to attract experienced organizers, new organizers, peer-to-peer.
Go ahead. And then Jaz, I'm going to come to you if you're ready.
So I may as well be consistent with my reputation and not deviate from it. The whole idea of talking about leadership in formerly incarcerated people and how that's going to happen to me is ridiculous. Formerly incarcerated people will lead this movement, will not ask permission, nor will we make apologies. End of that discussion. Everyone should be involved. Everyone probably will be involved. We have to have some serious discussions. There's some natural tensions. The whole idea that folks in leadership now feel that formerly incarcerated leadership emerging excludes them is not really warranted because we all bring a different perspective. I know the perspective of people who've done time in prison and the academic perspective, but I don't know the perspective of a family member who had to go without a loved one for 20 years and what trauma that caused them. I don't know the perspective of people who are relying on prisons but didn't develop them, people who work in prisons and who provide products to prisons are in a relationship with us that's somewhat contentious, but they didn't create that. So I don't have an issue with them in particular. They're just trying to make a living. So we got to kind of rise above that. But the whole idea of whether or not people who are directly impacted by a movement should be leading the movement, to me, is ludicrous. I mean, that would be like the suffrage movement saying, I wonder if women should lead the movement about women's rights. Or I wonder if youth should lead the movement about, I mean, this is just absolutely ridiculous. So I'm sitting here almost offended at the whole idea that we would even have to go back and forth to figure out who's going to lead this movement. Formerly incarcerated people will lead this movement. That's just the way it is. I just figured I'd put that out there.
Incarcerated.
Yes. I'm sitting over here, I'm still pissed off. Because Matt is my man. I love him dearly, right? And I love the work that he's done. But to having, I asked this question ad nauseum. How many of you in this room have done time in prison?
Should I raise your hand?
Yeah, raise your hand. Okay. Now, this is no reflection on Matt or any of you, because I'm a humanist. I believe that we're all human beings. That's what we have in common, right? But I'm trying to imagine myself going into the Jewish community, trying to lead a movement in the Jewish community. They'd look at me and say, man, excuse me, are you in the wrong place? And the issue of where this leadership should come from, I've been reflecting on my life in every aspect, man, from the school to prison pipeline, man. I was in the precinct at 5 years old, in the 32nd precinct in Harlem at 5 years old. And everything that happens along the trajectory of a black man's life in Harlem has happened to me. I've experienced it, literally, man. I've lost brothers, man, that have died inside. I came out, man, and my mother died a week before. I was a major leader in the Attica Rebellion. I've done everything. Stop and frisk, I am stop and frisk. And journalists from all over the world come to use my stuff. Nobody does stop and frisk like me, right? So I've experienced every aspect of this. I've been in the streets. I've done the criminal side. I've done everything. And I got 4 college degrees. I have a master's degree. And I have Harvard bragging rights. Now, who is a better expert than me? Nobody. You understand? And that goes for all of us that have have gone through these. I mean, we've lived it. We walk in history books, the stuff that you read about in school and academia, man. We've lived this, you know. So I'm not trying to claim leadership of a movement simply because, you know, I've been to prison. No, not only have I been to prison, man, I've been to the same place that you went to get your information. I've been to academia. I've got all of that. You know, but my personal direct experience puts me in a position where I'm not ready to surrender. Surrender is not an option. You understand? But, you know, for the last 40 years, we've had people in power and people in control of movements and control of funding that have been, I mean, they've been enemies. You know, they're the biggest obstacle to change, right? And we can't do that no more. That's over with.
It's a man after my own heart.
Hi, everyone. My name is Theresa Shoatz. I'm the daughter of Russell Maroon Shoatz, who is recently, we had an awesome victory of having him released from solitary confinement, which he had been in 22 plus years. He's been in prison 40 years, and he's 70 years of age. He'll be 71 in August. I came in on the end of something he said he's very pissed off about, and I heard something earlier in reference to how do you respond, or what does it feel like to have a loved one in prison 40 years? My dad went in before I was 9 years of age. I'll be 50 in July. So my dad has been in prison 40 years, most of my life. It was traumatizing. My dad went to prison when it wasn't fashionable. The government makes it fashionable. Even with its control units, they have fashionable names like SMUs and restricted housing units, RHU. So what I seen coming up was prisoners who were getting college education behind bars. Now that funding is gone and it's used to build more prisons. What I would like to say also is that when you talk about leadership, and I came in on the end of this, so I don't want to speculate where you went, but we're at a major forum right now, the Left Forum. If you were to take all the organizations involved and all these workshops and the people involved, and we all came together, what would that look like? But sometimes we kind of get caught up in who's going to lead. And that's something that we're really going to have to get above. Because in any organization that you're going to work in, there's going to be some disagreements. The big portion is, how do you handle it? Because we're all so bright. Aren't we incredible? I love being around people like myself because, hey, we're one of a kind. We get it. We get it. We're to the left, so we get it. We're special. So being so special, of course, we all have a different outlook on how this is going to work. But nothing can take the place of setting the example for our youth that they are just totally disrespecting right now. Our youth are being disrespected on every level. So if we don't set that example for them, we're leaving them by the wayside. So wherever we are, whether it be prisoners who lead or the people who are recently released, we have to figure out a way to come together. And that's the key, because there are many groups. No one has figured this out. And so I want to thank Matt, because Matt, I met this guy. He came to our organization and was like, I want to film y'all. I'm doing this broken on all sides. And we're like, who is he? You know, when, you know, some of us get caught up in, don't take my picture. I don't know who you are. But we allowed him to do that. He came to HRC, the Human Rights Coalition group. And now, look where we are. He's done some incredible work. And he, as a part of some of the other orgs I have worked with, had to, part of his thing was going into communities that were different. The Unitarian community, the Jewish community. One of the lawyers that just signed on to my dad's case pro bono is Jewish. And you know what he said? I didn't know about this stuff. My friends don't know. I went to the synagogue last Saturday. I told all my friends, and they're interested. So we do have to step out and bring other people on board.
I'll come back. And Azadeh or Marlene, I'll give you a chance in a moment.
My name is Travis Morales, and I'm with the Stop Mass Incarceration Network and a supporter of the Revolutionary Communist Party. And I haven't been to prison, and the reason I haven't been to prison is the 4 times I was indicted in my home state of Texas on felony charges, we were able to build political movements to prevent that. Otherwise, I would have been in prison. And on this question of who should be involved, quite frankly, I think anybody who can see the horrors of mass incarceration, or we can win them to see the horrors of mass incarceration, should be involved in this. And from that perspective, a couple of months ago here at John Jay, over 90 people responded to a call from Dr. Cornel West and Carl Dix of the Revolutionary Communist Party. And the people included formerly incarcerated people, the families of people who are incarcerated, families of people who were in detention at that time, who were in the hunger strike in Tacoma, Washington, 7 families who've had their children murdered at the hands of police in different places in this country, as well as revolutionaries and a number of other people. But we came together to say no more, and a call was issued by this diverse group of people, a call for October of this year, for a month of resistance to mass incarceration, police terror, repression, and the criminalization of a generation, which I think is both an opportunity and a necessity to bring all kinds of people together from whatever your perspectives, whether you think there needs to be prison reform, or like some of us who believe it's going to take revolution, nothing less, to put it into the ills of the system, to come together. And we need to impact millions of people, change the way millions of people look at mass incarceration, and bring many of them into a movement to stop it. And I want to end with this. The vision is that we need to have things like on the campuses, because we got to get the students, dozens and dozens of campuses having teach-in, symposiums, people exposing what the horrors of mass incarceration are. We need the artists and the musicians doing their works exposing this. We need major ads in the New York Times and other papers with this call signed by a whole array of people. You can see the beginning list on the Stop Mass Incarceration Network site. And we need an outpouring of thousands and thousands and thousands of people on the October 22nd National Day of Protest to stop police brutality, repression, and the criminalization of a generation. Please talk to me about this afterwards. We need to involve many, many more people in this movement.
Just one sentence, echoing something that Jaz said and Theresa, and that's that I think we're all pretty clear on the economic reasons for prisons. But we don't talk very much about the political reasons for prisoners, and that's a harder row to hoe for all of us.
Gail, did you have keep the G.
So I'm not sure if anyone was able to check out Fania Davis yesterday at the plenary session that was held in terms of transforming the criminal justice system. But she is a leader in the restorative justice movement. She's the executive director of restorative justice for Oakland Youth here in New York City. I'm one of a handful of folks that are trying to start a restorative justice movement in New York City, New York State. And really, I guess my question is, like we're talking about, ending mass incarceration, the fight against mass incarceration, and so on. But how do we do that if we don't change the paradigm? If we don't shift that paradigm that brought us into this mess to begin with? And so that's the question. And I think it's also a really amazing tool for community dialogue, for coalition building, and so on. So we would very much, love to be a part of this fight as well. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Can I just comment what you said? It would be good if you might join the restorative justice movement, because there is one in New York. There's a lot one everywhere. So sometimes we often tend to try to do our own thing when we should just fortify what's already there. Like Bonnie has been doing restorative justice for years, transformative justice. I prefer to call it transformative justice. You know what I mean? Jaz has been doing that on a community level. Like you have people who've been doing this for decades. So I just suggest that maybe as a larger picture, fortifying it rather than trying to create something separate. And I think that we fall victim of doing, or big organizations fall victim of doing that. So over the summer, just want to make a comment that moving forward, I would love to give everybody my contact information leaving, even though I know everybody and I work with everybody, but I have had guidance from Jaz, guidance from, legends like Bonnie, from OBrien, from everybody here, with Theresa. So I think that we should continue down that role and not only being the leadership role, but paving the way in our actions, and working together collaboratively on all issues. Because all issues, if you put it under the umbrella of mass incarceration, are equal, in my opinion.
Azadeh or Marlene, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd like to.
Okay, go ahead, Marlene.
Okay, so my name's Marlene, and I'm with the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. Hi, y'all. I know some of you in here. So I worked for years in the campaign. I'm also a socialist in the International Socialist Organization. But for many years, I worked in the campaign. I've only been to prison visiting prisoners and visited with family members, and also visited death row when they allowed that in Illinois. I would walk on the tiers of death row. So just to say that, I think that we have to convince people like myself. We have to convince people. I vision that we have to have is of people that. Oh, did you lose me? Oh,
no, go ahead.
Okay. No, we got you.
Who do we have to convince?
We got you.
I'm sorry. And if you lose me, the technology is. I go in and out, so I have to keep touching my screen. So do that sigh again if for some reason I go out, because I can't tell on my end. Do you know what I'm saying? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Keep going.
Are you hearing me or not?
Yes.
We hear you.
Oh, okay. So, all right. Okay, awesome. So, just to say that I think that we have to convince people like myself that haven't been intimately touched by the criminal justice system in the sense of like having gone there. But we have to reach out to those like myself in order to build the biggest number of people, because it's going to take that to create a kind of groundswell, to create that pressure to really get the kind of change that we're talking about. Because like what we said, yes, there's lots of separate little things that people are working on, and they're incredibly important. But even around our fight around the death penalty, what we always said is that the death penalty is the tip of the iceberg. It's the most brutal aspect of the criminal justice system because it executes people, but it's connected to the wider whole vision of what the criminal justice system is, right? So they tell us it's, we got to get tough on crime. Well, we got to change the rhetoric to get tough on the causes of crime, right? We have to turn it around, and we have to be the ones that connect the dots, like Michelle Alexander said. So reach out to people that are in the fight for 15.
We lost you.
Movement, to raise the minimum wage of our. And then just lastly, just to say that, Matt said, about the Big Ten. I think it's more, the question has to be for us right now is what's our vision and how do we get there? What is the kind of vision that we're looking for? So we're talking about we want to end mass incarceration, right? We want to create prison abolition. But within that, we have to build things that are going to get there. So I just want to use one last example, and that is because I've been reading a lot about Freedom Summer, and it's been 50 years since Freedom Summer. And what did Freedom Summer? Freedom Summer was when they were at a not a standstill, but a bit of a lull in 1964, and people that were fighting for years down in the South were like, what are we going to? How can we break this out nationally? And they were like, people aren't paying attention because they don't give a shit when black people, are treated like crap in this country. So they sent a whole bunch, it was very consciously thought of. They sent 1,000 students down to the South, and they did create a groundswell of national attention that did end up creating massive, a huge movement that broke things out nationally and so on, and forced really our leadership to take notice of that. So I think it's both things. I think we have to work on the here and now reforms with a vision of going forward. Because when you fight and win certain reforms, it gains confidence and it instructs people on how to take on the next aspects of the movement to go forward. And within that, we never water it down. And I'll just end on the campaign to end the death penalty anyway. We worked with other liberal organizations that said, oh, well, you have to say then, if you're not for the death penalty, there has to be an alternative, like life without the possibility of parole. And we said, no, why do we have to have that kind of an alternative? Why do we have to say that's what we're for? say this is what we're against, and have a vision going forward of more of a restorative justice kind of thing, and a vision of eventually getting rid of the criminal justice system, which never, as we know, criminalizes the 1%, but it's always the 99%.
Thanks, Marlene.
I was just thinking, and what she was saying, and one of the things I was thinking about, I got my thought back after I spilled the water and wanted to talk about, echo what you said about the family members, and I wanted to share with you all. It's going to be maybe more than 2 minutes, but I cannot get on the New Jersey Turnpike without crying. This is 17, 18 years after the death of my husband. Coming here to you, it hit me again. And so we live with this every day. We live with this every day. I think we need to have a massive boycott. And I would love to start at McDonald's, and we just don't go to McDonald's. Those of us that want to end mass incarceration. I really liked what Occupant Wall Street did. I think, not getting on the bus, not taking a seat. We have to do something. In order to get people's attention, I think hit them in the pockets where their money is. They don't want to pay higher wages. That's another reason we should boycott. So I think I would love to just start boycotting everything. Hit them in the pockets.
I'm trying to hold on. I'm sitting on my hands. Why? Oh, trust me, I'm sitting on my hands. It's like the idea that we should just move on past this leadership conversation is very troubling for me.
But why don't you not sit on your hands?
Well, I think the fact that I opened up the conversation about leadership and we spent an hour talking about it says something about the need to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I really do think it is a big part of what's in the way of us moving towards having a movement and a shared vision for reform. And again, I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. Building the leadership of people directly impacted, giving them what they need to move into leadership and supporting them is not at the exclusion of anyone else in leadership. It is just that historically in this movement, people who are directly impacted have been left out of leadership positions and have been brought in a way that feels extremely tokenized. And what ends up happening is we have discussions in rooms like this, and then people who have done time in prison have another discussion in the hallway. And so that's why I think it's so important to have the discussion in these rooms and make everyone feel extremely uncomfortable until we get to a point that we can all agree on. I don't know what that point is. I'm going to disagree with half the people in this room about where we need to end up. I'm fine with that, as long as my voice is heard and it's heard in a meaningful way. So let's not get past it. Let's think about it for a while. Let's let it marinate, and let's think of what each of us can do to help build the capacity of people directly impacted, recognizing that it does not diminish the reason you're at the table. I'll say one last thing. I was in New Mexico at an event held by Open Society Foundation years ago. And I remember I was in a position at the time, because my thinking has evolved, where I thought only people directly impacted should have been in the lead. And I remember a woman standing up and explaining what brought her to the work. It was around being in the foster care system and how she made it out successfully and how many of her, peers who were in the system did not. And it just opened the door for me to think differently about why and how other people come to the table. And that's fine, and many other formerly incarcerated leaders get that, and we don't want to diminish that, minimize that, etc. But we do want to have the opportunity to have the discussions we're having in the hallway, in the room, and not have it brushed over. So that's why I was sitting on my hands, but thanks for pushing me to say it out loud.
And I want to say this thing about leadership. As you said, let it sink and marinate. However we do it, we cannot get stuck on it, because our youth are out there and they're stranded. And the Pennsylvania prison system right now, or even last year, they're starting to make the face of prison look more friendly. Now you're able to call each prison, and there's a representative. just for family members who have complaints. Not that they move on your complaint, but they just talk friendly. Our Secretary of Prisons, Secretary Wetzel of Pennsylvania, is also, this is why we have to move fast. He's coming into the communities now. He visited the Salvation Army on South Broad Street last year. He's getting to our church leaders and to people who have property in Pennsylvania, because now with the new face of prison, they want to make it look good. The same way they made solitary, they fooled us for 30 years with solitary confinement with those fashionable names, restricted housing units. They're coming into our communities asking, do you have property? We want to move prisoners to the community. We're doing a good thing now. Yet in Southwest Philly, the OBrien's ice cream plant, they want to make that a halfway house. Now, the properties that they're interested in, they're still going to have barbed wires and all this stuff. It's going to be prisons inside our communities. Instead of spending money for beds in our communities and asking church leaders to rent out their property and to get on board to house prisoners, that's what they ask in churches. We have to find this leadership and do it quickly before it becomes a community thing.
Yeah, I hear the issue of prisons coming up. That came up quite a few times already here. You know, prisoners need one thing, man. We need to turn prisons into institutions of vocational and academic learning, man. And that's it. That's it. All the rest of that, you know, tweaking and touching, and once you educate prisoners and they become critical thinkers, they're gonna handle their problems, right? They're gonna handle their problems. You know, we can reduce that whole targeting of prisoners and prisoner issues, man. Just get them colleges back in there, get that vocational training back in there, so that they'll have something to return to the community with, right? And then we can focus. We need to focus on our community issues, because this is where it all starts. This is where mass incarceration starts. It starts in the community. You know, it's an outgrowth of the community. Same with prisons. It's an outgrowth of the community. They didn't just, you know, prisons are not a separate entity. You know, they're connected to the communities, right? And the problem starts with the school-to-prison pipeline. So when we got all these human beings locked up in these cages, it's obvious to the stupidest person on the planet that if their problem started with education, the school-to-prison pipeline, then this is what we have to give them in there. They have no marketable skills. This is what we have to give them. So when they return, and you're talking about reentry into what? Huh? We're talking about a busted economy, man. An economy that doesn't have jobs for people coming out of college with degrees. You know, they have to work at McDonald's, right? So what we have to do is, you know, to put this prison thing to rest, is we have to turn these prisons into institutions of vocational and academic training, man. Okay? That's what we have to do with prisons.
I heard you had your hand up for a while and I missed you, right?
Well, this is kind of, I'm going to try to talk quickly because you guys all know a lot more about what's going on than I do. But kind of the question of like leadership and having like kind of a national movement, what I've noticed a lot is like, of course, like I think people who are affected by it and incarcerated are the ones who should be leading it. But I think on campuses all over the country, it's disturbing how little like youth who are studying government, studying law, know about the country like implementing this form of social control. And I think like a big way to like get the message out and to overcome like the overwhelming apathy is to have people who like you are experts, like who have gone through this, who have family members going through this, like coming to campuses and kind of unsettling that, because people need to be made extremely uncomfortable at the fact that they are the status quo and they are supporting a government that just is implementing something that's so racist and so like disturbing because people don't know. Like even I, until like a year ago, didn't know, and we need to be hearing that. That needs to be kind of shoved down people's throats more, because you go to every campus and they're like doing environmental movements about fracking, and then this is completely glaringly absent, and that needs to be in that dialogue. People need to be made much more uncomfortable about their privilege of not being involved in this as well. You can go.
Oh, well, to touch on that, I mean, there's so many more things that we don't learn about in any colleges. Like I learned about, I've been working with a group called Books Through Bars since like 2007 now. I'm from the one in New York City, but we have tons of different groups like all over the country. We got letters from prisoners requesting like what kind of books they want, and we get books donated to us. Unfortunately, like it's the hardest thing to get money for, and postage is just getting like crazy more expensive every year. But I was gonna say, what Jaz said about the education, like I think it's just an atrocity in itself that like so many of the people that write us say that like we are the only way that they like would get a book or any form of like educational materials, and then whenever we get a thank you letter, like it says like, yeah, we passed around the book to like 20 different people, and like just it shouldn't be a group of people like us that are doing this. Like it definitely, I think there's just something so wrong about that there isn't like a system of education like more. And definitely, like, just to touch upon also, like, what you said about colleges, I mean, I came into this movement also as, like, an animal rights activist, and just, like, in general, like, wanting, like, focusing on, like, all forms of, like, powerlessness, and just, I think there are so many issues that people are so blind about, so, yeah.
Azadeh, Shashahani, if you have anything to say, I'm going to come to you with an opportunity after Lee speaks.
Okay, I'll just be really quick. First of all, just on what Jaz said, if anyone hasn't heard Jaz speak about the organizing that happened in Attica behind bars in the lead up to the uprising and so on. There's a great speech of him on wearemany.org where he actually talks about not just the sorry Jaz I'm talking about, but about the political moment that happened in, because it was both a vocational and an educational moment, but it was also political organizing that happened in the yard, and that was part of like those links that were happening between SDS and revolutionaries outside and so on. So I don't want to speak for Jaz, but I'd really encourage people to check that out, because I feel like that is really insightful for us today. And I know that Five spends a lot of time and effort trying to think about how to get copies, for example, of Michelle Alexander's book, Behind Bars, and so on, and in terms of trying to think about what kind of resources can we begin to talk about to help people organizing on the inside. The other thing is just, I mean, I'm thinking about what Glen was saying about leadership and then about funding, because I think it's sort of, the two are connected, because the question about funding is really complicated, because we live in a world in which so much is sort of, we are either, on the victim of grant funding and so on, or government, what have you, and then at the same time, so I guess the question I've been thinking about a lot is, how does that both open up opportunities for us but also tie our hands? And if we're talking about real independent leadership, particularly by those most impacted, how does the whole sort of funding structure model and so on also create problems for that independent voice to really develop and perhaps challenge and push the boundaries of what funders might need and want? So I think that's a political conundrum that we have to kind of grapple with, and is building grassroots movements and sort of people power and so on, is that how do we kind of think about those questions? So.
Can I just say one thing, even without the mic? That literally there was one of the largest foundations that fund this, one of the largest foundations that fund this work, when I went to them with my new organization, said, we're already funding a group that's run by someone formerly incarcerated. Mm-hmm. Just to crystallize the problem.
Wow. Azadeh, do you want to comment? Or should I come back to you?
Briefly, I mean, I think a lot of these conversations, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of these conversations about leadership, who is, leading the movement and funding, are also happening within the immigrant rights movement, especially recently with the announcement from Obama that he's not going to look into basically putting an end to deportations, and he's going to defer that decision until the end of the summer with the false hope that Congress is going to do something. So a lot of the grassroots group on the ground are very unhappy with that, because it seems that some of the groups in DC with funding and resources and access kind of made the decision that that's the right thing to do without speaking to the people who are actually getting affected by the everyday separation of families and deportation and the hurt and the pain that's affecting our families and communities. So it's very clear for grassroots community what needs to happen, that deportations need to stop now, and at the same time there needs to be a push towards comprehensive immigration reform, but one shouldn't come at the cost of another.
Thank you. So I just wanted to jump in with a quick comment. Once again, everybody who knows me knows that I'm just a doer. I'm just, I'm a leader. I'm a good general, but I'm also a great soldier in this war, and I just believe in doing the footwork. On the topic of education, I come from the guidance and the experience of working with mostly everybody in this room, but also Jaz. So I took on the role of education by trying to inspire students to teach in colleges. And most of my students who are interns from St. Lawrence University down to even Columbia, and the students from Prep from NYU Law are all teaching in correctional facilities. So anybody who wants to play a part in that, everybody knows me, everybody has my contact information here. It would double the efforts of education inside. I have events at NYU Law around mass incarceration and solitary. I've created curriculums on every subject. Using professors inside, I've created curriculum on psychology, anthropology, sociology, even legal classes. So I have curriculum already ready. If anybody wants to be involved with that to expand my work, or not my work, but the work of educating the students and then inspiring them to educate others, just contact me. And I have like classes every day.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I'll come back to you, G.
I just wanted to make a quick comment on the education piece. I really appreciated what you said, and I bet that there's students at your school who are formerly incarcerated and don't feel comfortable disclosing, and I would urge you as students to look at what you can do to make your institution more accessible to formerly incarcerated people. At UC Berkeley right now, there is a really good core group of formerly incarcerated students, some of them who did significant time at Pelican Bay, and they've got the school to give them a center. They're calling themselves underground scholars, and they're getting the school to actually give them resources to develop their own center and make these things more accessible. So these things can be done, and support from students like you would really help make that happen.
What school are you in?
Brendon College, undergraduate college in Maine.
In Maine?
Oh, yeah. We were supposed to have.
Rachel,
Did she tell you? Okay, we were supposed to have Rachel.
Two quick things. I want to just follow up something that Bonnie said, which is that hopefully we are involved in the work that we're doing. We are involved in discussions with people who are still inside. Excuse me, who are still inside. And I'm interested in hearing, maybe not at this moment, but particularly from the people from California, how you were able to most effectively maintain contact with people inside so that you could work together. I do a lot of letter writing and distributing of proposals and stuff to folks inside to get their opinions, and it's pretty labor intensive. But that's another reason that we need to work with people who are formerly incarcerated, whose colleagues and friends can help be the voices that we need from inside. Second thing is we here really have to pay more attention than we have in this discussion yet about the folks with mental illness who are in the prisons, because we do need education, we need vocational training, and those folks who are seriously mentally ill, who used to be in the back wards of our hospitals and stuff, who are now in solitary confinement in our prisons, need our concerted attention. They need more than education.
No, there is a lot of work, though. There's a lot of work.
Yeah, not in my state yet. Thank you. But I'd like to hear.
What state is that?
New Jersey.
Just again echoing the importance of people being invited onto college campuses. I spoke last summer at Riverside, and that resulted and Ojiri showed his art, and that resulted in 4 or 5 different campus invitations. And the students are generally stunned. They're absolutely stunned. I mean, I can look and see the black and brown students and the heads going up and down, and they absolutely get it, and the white students are baffled. Jaz talked a little bit about young people. There's a new site that the American Friends Service Committee is working with in Jersey called Live from Lockdown. And this is gang members who have maybe 30 years a blog. And they're going to be working with youngsters in schools and out of schools. So that's a model. And Rutgers also has a program, like what you were talking about, where ex-prisoners are invited to come on campus and take class.
So I'm going to give it to Jaz and then Karen. And around this time, I was hoping we would maybe be able to think about, we're getting towards the end, so is this just sort of another session where we're talking through the issues, or is there any way that we want to take advantage of the different people we have in the room to think about sort of ways moving forward, or like what could we concretely do with the people and groups we have in the room?
Yeah, I was seeing the need to move this conversation forward, right? What we're doing here, right here in this room, is happening around this country. You know, I just came back from Chicago a week before last and spent 3 days there and meeting with people from around the country, you know, from Texas and Florida and several other states. And they were addressing the same issues that we're addressing here. And at the time that we were meeting in Chicago at President Obama's church, people were meeting in California. It was organized by a faith-based community, and they were having the same discussion there at the same time that we were having that discussion in Chicago. So this is an idea whose time has come, right? This is an idea whose time has come, and we have to address certain issues. But organizing is a set pattern, man. You have to have a vision of what it is that you want. Without vision, the people perish, man. You know, if we don't have a vision, then we don't have nothing to build a functional unity around. You know, a unity that works for all of us, right? A common interest, right? But we have to have a vision, and the vision has to be that umbrella, and it has to be the controlling aspect of everything that we do. We cannot have a movement without vision, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that we need to be talking about here. And then we can begin to talk about goals and strategy and tactics and the rest of the process, because organizing is a process. It's not something that just happens simply because you want it to happen, right? It's a process. And like I say, I think one of the things that has to come out of this gathering here is us connecting with those other gatherings that are happening around. We have to begin to identify statewide coalitions, you know, and because that's what is going to be needed, you know. So when people come to the table, they're not just coming as individuals expressing their concerns and their interests, or coming as a single group expressing their interests and their concerns, right? We have to have statewide coalitions, and then we have to build from that. We have to build them together, create an umbrella so that we have a national movement, if that's what it is that we're trying to have. Otherwise, we just sitting here having a conversation. You know, when we leave here, that has to be our goal, is to begin to connect with everybody nationally, you know, across race, class, you know, all the disconnects that have kept us apart all these years. We have to begin to figure out how we're going to create an umbrella that everybody can fit under.
So maybe we should focus the rest of the conversation on that, and how do we, what are some concrete ways we can do that? Karen, you don't. It's okay if it's not about that.
It wasn't about that. I think it's probably more important to focus it on that.
We need to know each other. We need to have contact information for each other.
Okay, so I do have a sign-up sheet, and I was kind of waiting to see what would happen. We can send it around. There's just name, best contact info, and notes. So for now, just put your name and email, and maybe if we get further, we'll be able to pass around again and write something in the notes.
Just be clear, you're going to share that afterwards?
Yeah, I'll just, I guess, send out an email to all of us so everyone can see it. Does that sound reasonable?
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, put if you're with an organization, put an organization. Go ahead, Amy.
Or if you're on a campus, put the campus.
Thanks. I was going to suggest that too. I would like to, in terms of the question of visits, my name's Amy. I work with a group called Rockland Coalition to End the New Jim Crow, and we're working on a Ban the Box campaign and a number of other projects. And I wanted to just sort of point to a couple of strands of the conversation that to me seem really interesting. The conversation about what can be done on campuses to make campuses more welcoming to people that have been in prison and are now seeking education, which also seems to relate generally to basically a theme about what can the community, what can we do from our community to make our communities welcome. And I want to go back to what you were saying, Theresa, about like what can we do to make sure that we're controlling that process as opposed to the state through various invasive efforts. And I wanted to ask if you could actually clarify what you were saying, because I felt like you sort of closed it off in a rushed way. I want to know, like, what is it that you envision, like, as opposed to how you see that process coming down from the state. Like, what would you want, to have in terms of engaging the churches and that sort of thing?
So there's a lot to that in reference to, because some of the churches are financially unstable. So they depend on legislators and people like in the Department of Correction for money. The church used to be the haven of where our issues were settled in the black community. That is no more. Right. So even when you look at Occupy, how that some of it got split in Pennsylvania because people started dealing with the legislature. And that's for people, a lot of people who don't understand or believe this prison thing is real. Some people do believe, people should be in prison. So when you have people like that, like today, if you join in with us, you must be educated and understand where this stems from and where it's going. It's an attack on the poor, and it's not just black and brown folks. It's poor white folks, too. It's the poor, and it's our children. Let me just give you this example. I've taken in 10 foster kids, and just this year time, I had a 6-year-old, very intelligent, separated from his mother. She missed 7 weeks of visit. He started tearing down posters in the classroom. That was it. Just tear down posters every Wednesday, because she, by the 4th week, didn't show up. Okay, he's to be medicated now. Very intelligent, and when the psychiatrist said, you're going to be medicated, he said, well, I guess I have a headache. Because he was so intelligent, he knew he didn't need medicine. What that boiled down to, then once he got the medication, 6 tablets a day, the next time he pulled down that the papers off the wall and he walked out the door of the classroom, he goes into a new file that's a juvenile detention file. See, once your kids are medicated in Pennsylvania, their actions now, that is the clear pipeline to the prison system. They become almost a ward of the prison after the 3rd violation. And so what I say is, if you don't know, and if you don't believe what's going on in the prison system, and you're here for a reason, get to know the numbers. $681 million was spent last year to build 2 prisons, and all the school district needed to keep all the employers on board was $50 million. $50 million, they spent $681, and a couple of months ago they asked for more money. So what we need to do is trust in each other. Let's not go back and forth on this who runs it. They want us to do that. We got to come together and show them we're together. Also, we cannot be infiltrated by legislators. You cannot believe everything that they say. They will split us down the line.
So, and does anyone else want to talk about this? How to continue, talking about coordinating different, the work we're doing. Five, did you have something to say?
You really want to give me that? Put everybody out here on the spot.
Okay. Yeah, I'll come back to you.
I have to start working tomorrow, ASAP.
We know.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Jaz raised an important point that I wanted to respond to, because I think this question of having a vision is very important. And I wanted to share with people the last paragraph of this call for a month of resistance to mass incarceration, police terror, repression, and the criminalization of a generation, because I think it does speaking to what Jaz said. It says, in October 2014, our resistance to mass incarceration must reverberate across the country and around the world. There must be powerful demonstrations nationwide on October 22nd, the National Day of Protest to stop police brutality, repression, and the criminalization of a generation. Throughout October, there must be panels and symposiums on campuses and in neighborhoods, major concerts and other cultural expressions, ferment in the faith communities and more, all aimed at taking the movement to stop mass incarceration to a much higher level. October 2014 must be a month that makes clear that thousands and thousands are willing to stand up and speak out today to awaken and rally forth millions. It must be the beginning of the end of mass incarceration in the U.S. And I wanted to read that because I think we're at a crossroads here. As Carl Dix of the Revolutionary Communist Party has pointed out, this mass incarceration is a slow genocide, which could quickly become a fast genocide. And those verdicts down in Florida, that was the call for these racist, armed bigots to start killing our youth. And there's both a necessity and an opportunity for this movement to make a big leap forward. And I would really encourage people to get this call, to think about it, and from whatever perspective you have or wherever you are, to be part of making this month, a month of resistance. And I just want to end with this. The sister here, I think, had a very important point about the campuses, but I think it applies everywhere. And that is, we got to be challenging people. Both people who, if we tell them the reality and bring the reality of what's happening with mass incarceration, would be part of this movement. But those who are keeping their eyes shut, they got to be sharply challenged. What kind of world do you want to live in when these kinds of atrocities and torture are happening right in this country?
Oh, are people allowed to come to, are there organizing meetings for the October event?
Yes, there's national conference calls going on. There's organizing meetings. People can talk to me afterwards about that.
So I am one who believes the tent should include everybody and everything on every agenda. I believe the tent should be big. I don't think it should exclude anybody. We need all the movement. As Jaz always says, we're less than 15% of the population, people of color, but we are mostly the majority incarcerated. So I say that because it's going to take more than us to win a war against this. And we can't be divided by race, by creed, by what we want to address. And I think we're more powerful together. So just as I say that, I think we need to be realistically, because I hate to say it like it's happening, but realistically more supportive with each other. Even by just signing on to things. Even just by supporting things. Even just by hosting each other's work, right? So we do a lot of movements. We work with a lot of students. We work with food pantries, creating harvests for those previously incarcerated. But I think it needs to be a move, which me and you are going to definitely hang out. But I think it needs to be a move to support those incarcerated. It would also support the legislation. We got music they were working on. I met this young man 2 years ago. Did an event. He's like, "Five, we need to do this." Boom, he's been on board ever since. As a matter of fact, it was me, you, and Matt. We did a film screening and a panel discussion at his school. He's developing an album called the Die Jim Crow album, which is like different genres against mass incarceration. Out of that came out another album that I'm doing called Incarcerated Nation, and I got 20-something top artists on it. So, I mean, we need to have a push toward that. We need to solidify these movements to give our word and our voices a lot bigger speech. And who should be at the backbone? Because we have all the experts in the room here. So it should be on promotional videos and out there on the internet. Like, we should have, you know what I mean? Glenn should be a part of that. Jaz should be a part of that. Like, everybody should be a part of a bigger movement to expand our voices. And I think we can only do that together. And we should just be supporting on every issue, even if it doesn't our general main focus.
There will be legislators that will help us. We just got to know which ones.
No, that's their job to help us. We're not going to ask them for nothing. That's their job. That's their job.
We're almost done. We've been very well behaved.
I just have to stand because I'm short. Hi, my name is Karen Meshkov, and Matt, I'm honored. Matt is my partner and my husband. I've had the pleasure of working on this movie with him since, I think, 2010, 2011, something like that. And I've had the incredible honor of being able to tour it with him across the country, internationally. I have seen the world change since the time that Matt first brought this into my consciousness and blew my mind. And really, I mean, I know, Bonnie, I know other people who have been doing, Jaz, I know you've been doing this work for generations. It was new to me, and I cannot believe every publication I open, every time I turn on the news, is mass incarceration, mass incarceration, mass incarceration. So I still feel a little bit sort of like an outsider to it because I haven't been in the movement long. And so for those of you who have been at the core of this work and have made this happen, the movement is happening. It is happening. The work is tremendous, and it's happening all over the country and internationally. And so just sort of not to be too much of a pep talk, but just to say that just an incredible amount of gratitude to the people who've been doing this work for so long, and for the fact that it really feels like things are starting to turn and change. And that's all I wanted to say.
All right.
Glenn. Yeah, divine. The one thing I'm beginning to find out more and more the importance of is control of the narrative. Right? They have this narrative out here about crime and law and disorder and democracy and freedom and justice and all these phrases that they be throwing around. And this is what made it possible for them, for mass incarceration to emerge and to become the monster that it is because they control the narrative, right? And this is one of the things that everybody in this room can begin to, can take charge in, right? Do the research, and find out what the reality is and keep that out there. Keep that out there, because that's where we're competing with those that are in control of this system. Is we're competing with them in their narrative, right? That is central to their control, right? And until we begin to recognize that and begin to create an alternative narrative that we keep in their face, every time, for every political piece of news that comes out, every time one of them opens their mouth, we got an answer for them. We got the statistics, we got the research, you understand? We have the reality, the truth, and what it is that they're trying to sustain, or what it is they're trying to put over us. Right now, in New York City, after all our struggle around stop and frisk, and all the success that we appeared to have, Judge Scheinlin in the federal district court, the city council, passing legislation. We look around now, and the first thing that de Blasio does is he wants to prevent people from dying in traffic. Who do you think is going to be the target population for these traffic tickets and these violations? It's going to be the same people. And right now, down in the subways, it's been, entertainers, people have been entertaining down in the subways, and they're not breaking into your apartment. They're down there trying to, to make a buck, right, while they entertain you. He's targeting that population. So he's just shifting the focus from stop and frisk to the same population underground, right? And now they're talking about the housing projects and the level of crime in the housing projects. you know, we got to see this, and we have to be there and to expose it for what it is, right? It's just a shift, you know, a shift in focus, man, from stop and frisk. Okay, we're going to stop that policy and practice, but we're going to do this, right? So we need to be I mean, we have to be alert, and we have to have an opposing narrative, and we have to expose them for what it is they're trying to do.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more people. Marlene, I know your head. Okay, maybe it's our cyber people. So let's have Azadeh and then Marlene, and we'll say thank you, everyone, for being here, and that will be the end of the session.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to say something briefly about, you know, following up on what was said about this movement happening internationally. So as we speak right now, there are 125 Palestinian prisoners who are being subjected to indefinite detention without charge or trial by Israel. And it's basically the same tactics of social control that's being employed by the Israeli government as, you know, it is here by the U.S. I mean, a lot of it was exported from Israel to here or from here to Israel. So I hope that people can, you know, express solidarity, their petitions that are going around. And there's also going to be a workshop at the 2014 National Lawyers Guild Convention in Chicago from September 3rd to 7th. It's focusing on the connections and the similarities between the mass incarceration system in the U.S. and Israel. So I hope to see you all there.
And Azadeh just got back from Palestine, right?
Yes.
Yes. So we'll look forward to hearing your report.
Thank you.
Marlene?
Yeah, so I was really glad that Jaz raised some of that stuff about the narrative, the vision, because I really couldn't agree more. And, you know, some people sort of accuse us like we're all, you know, taking part in this discussion. We're all sort of on the same page. And really, we need to, you know, break out and talk to those that don't think the way that we think. But I think that conversations like this are actually really important, really, really important. And I think we need to figure out how to have more of them. So I'm glad that there's going to be another one. There's a lot of you that I don't know that now I know, and that's an exciting thing as we move forward. Because a lot of people say, well, that's just the choir. You're just preaching to the choir. But the choir has to be organized and figure out its voice and how to give that voice and amplify that voice in the larger world. So I also feel like when Matt said about the tent and who's in the tent, and I know all of us agree with this, but just to underline, it's those that are incarcerated too. Formerly incarcerated, family members, obviously, but also those that are incarcerated. And one of the things that we did was we initiated these live from death row. People thought that we were crazy, but we got the prisoners to call in, we amplified their voice on a cell phone to a mic, and we transformed the consciousness of students and people across the country. And actually some people in New York that sat in and listened to it were so moved by the conversation, had never even heard anybody that was in prison had ever even heard their voices, let alone their thoughts, were moved to write the play The Exonerated, which then went on to transform a lot. So in other words, ripples can make, you know, larger swells. But anyway, back to what Jaz was saying, because I feel like their narrative, right, is to dehumanize people. They're deserving of what they have. And I think we have to break that down and humanize people, but not like in the sense of we're doing it on their behalf. So I think that's one of the difficulties, obviously, because prisons are far away. It's difficult to get calls from prisoners and so on and so forth. In Texas, I think they have like 5 minutes every month to call. So it's difficult, but thinking of ways that we can bring and work with prisoners and bring their voices and their thoughts and their ideas into the movement. Like, did I lose you guys?
No, we got it.
Okay, just to bring their movements into it. And when someone said live from lockdown, I was like, that is just really awesome. And the other woman who was talking about how do we bring this to campuses and so on, I just feel like it would be so easy to pull together like a tour. I know Matt's done the movie, but you know, we need to do more of that, like either showing it or having different panels of people going out and talk. I know that involves money and all of that, but I think those are some of the things maybe going forward is figuring out how to bring out what our side has to do. We know what their side does. Dehumanize, try to shove it in the background? How are we going to humanize it and bring those that are actually being affected right now into the work of the movement? It's more difficult, but I think that we can do it. I think that we can do it. I just want to say thank you, and also I want to give everybody a copy of my newsletter. So I want to, if that's okay with Matt, whatever addresses he has, I would like to send a copy out. And if anybody else has publications, if they do, please send it. And just lastly, there's an amazing article by, it's actually something that by Ray Kerness, who was executed just a short time ago in Texas, and he wrote this incredible essay, which we published in here just a few days before he was executed. And is, as much as they try to snuff it out inside of prisons, and they try to make people feel like they're just stupid and they don't know anything, the connections that this man made about the whole prison industrial complex, what it means, and so on and so forth. And what we need to do is really an incredible, very moving piece, given what he was facing. So
okay, thank you. Thank you, Marlene. Yes, we're going to share this email list that was going around. We'll send out an email so everyone has it, and maybe we can share publications, ideas. I don't know where this is going to go from here, but again, you all are welcome to take part in the Philly gathering June 10th. I will send a message out about that. Please, if you haven't signed, there is a petition against horrible abuses going on at Bayside Prison that's going around. And thank you to all the invited participants especially, but also everyone else that came. Thank you. Thank you, Marlene. Thank you, Azadeh. Take care. Great closing.